Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Institute for Government. My name's Hannah White. I'm the director of the IFG, and a very big welcome to everyone who's here in the room and everyone joining us online for this Institute for Government event with the Secretary of State for Defence, John Healy. Well, I don't think there could have been a more opportune time for John to agree to come and speak to us this morning, with questions about the UK's approach to defence rocketing up the agenda with Donald Trump's return to the White House. We have conflict in the Middle East paused, at least for now, but war in Europe ongoing. So questions about how the UK equips itself to manage the risks it faces in the 21st century are amongst the most important in government. I'm delighted that John's going to make a few brief remarks this morning, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions myself before opening up to the floor. Just to say, this event is going to run for 45 minutes rather than the advertised 60. I'm sure you'll appreciate that John has quite a lot of other people he needs to go and talk to. So I'm sure no one will be offended by that. But I'm going to hand over.
I thought we were doing 30, actually. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. And let me begin particularly by thanking Hannah White and the Institute for Government for hosting us today. The Institute for Government, in my book, plays a really important role in Westminster. It helps hold ministers to account for what we say we're going to do as part of that bigger mission to secure in this country better government for Britain. And I must say, when I confirmed this event a few weeks ago, I wouldn't have expected such interest in MOD reform. And I'm really grateful for the level of this attendance and presence, both in the room and online. But I guess the pace of the geopolitical change to which you were referring, Hannah, and that we're seeing right now, confirms what I would argue is the need for change within defence too. As I said on my first day as Secretary of State in the department, when I came through the doors, I'm a Defence Secretary that's more interested in getting results than photo opportunities and headlines, and I guess I'm delivering on that promise, making a speech on defence reform bang in the middle of parliamentary recess today. However, the headlines, the wider headlines, and the decisions that we make right now over the coming weeks will not only define the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine, but the security of our world for a generation to come. And the nature of government means dealing with these challenges. But in my view, the test of leadership, of political leadership, isn't just about managing the immediate, it's also about reforming for the future. We're in a new era of threat, and that demands a new era for defence. And in the middle of everything else last week, the new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, from the US, and I made time to discuss the aims we share on defence reform. This government, our new Labour government, was elected on a mandate in one word: change. We govern on an instruction in one word: delivery. And as a new government, we're delivering for defence over these first 7 months. We've stepped up and speeded up support for Ukraine. We've increased defence spending this year by nearly £3 billion, and will set a path to spending 2.5% of GDP in the spring. We've launched a new defence industrial strategy. We've secured a deal to buy back 36,000 military homes to improve conditions for personnel and get better value for the taxpayer. We've given the men and women of our armed forces the biggest pay increase for more than 20 years. We signed the landmark Trinity House Agreement with Germany, and we've already progressed the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill through the House of Commons to give a strong independent voice to improve service life. And we have in the MOD two major change programmes, both launched within the first month of government. One, the Strategic Defence Review. Two, our Defence Reform Programme. Each is essential for the other. The Defence Review will reinforce the imperative for defence reform. Defence reform is the foundation for being able to implement the Defence Review. and for discharging what is our first duty in government. Exactly a year ago, actually in February, I gave a little notice speech at the Policy Exchange on defence reform, in which I outlined, and I said then, the need to create a stronger defence centre capable of leading Britain in meeting the increasing threats we must face. And in a little noticed section of the Labour Party manifesto at the July election, we pledged specific reforms and said, strengthening our defences requires stronger leadership, clearer accountability, faster delivery, less waste and better value for money. By the end of July, I'd put in place a new team, new leadership and weekly meetings with me to drive our defence reform programme. And today I wanted to offer an update on where we've got to and where we are going in the months ahead. I have to say, one of the really special things about this job, the special things about this special job, are the deeply impressive men and women I meet every day. From the submariners coming home from weeks undersea to the Clyde, to apprentices on Derby's nuclear reactor production lines, to the NATO HQ team with people in the MOD building that last week pulled together the Ukraine Defence Contact Group meeting of 46 nations in the room at 1 week's notice. Extraordinary people doing extraordinary things within a system that very often doesn't work in the way that we need it to for an increasingly dangerous world. Work in the way that we need it to provide our armed forces with what they need to deter, to fight and to win. First, underpinning it all is the absence of clear, consistent accountability, central to the effectiveness in any organisation. Yet I've been having too many meetings when I ask, who's leading this? Who's responsible for getting this done? And no one is able to give me a single clear answer. Second, while everyone agrees that defence spending needs to increase, it's not just how much you spend, but it's how well you spend it. And we're simply not securing the value for money our armed forces or our economy needs from every defence pound. We duplicate even the most central tasks. For example, we have 11 separate finance functions, 2,500 people doing the same activity in different places in different ways. And third, defence is mired in process and procedure. We've added complexity where simplicity is needed. In procurement, we've got a situation where we employ 11 checkers for every one decision maker. So no wonder it takes on average 6 years for a large programme simply to get onto contract. So today I'm here to declare that investment in defence will be matched by reform. First, we're introducing clear points of accountability at every level within UK defence, starting at the top with 4 new senior leaders. 4 leaders who report to me as Defence Secretary and my ministerial team at the central point of accountability to the British people and to the British Parliament. The Chief of the Defence Staff, who for the first time since this role was created, now commands the service chiefs, who will be the head of a newly established military strategic headquarters responsible for force design and war planning across our integrated force. The Permanent Secretary, our Principal Accounting Officer, who will run a leaner, more agile Department of State, with more policy muscle to lead arguments across Whitehall and with allies. We'll revamp the senior roles to elevate those into policy makers with broad portfolios and powerful mandates. Third, our new Armaments Director, who will fix procurement and drive growth, and I'll come back to the detail of the National Armaments Director in a moment. And fourthly, our Chief of Defence Nuclear, who will continue to lead and deliver the national nuclear enterprise within the recently established ring fence and freedoms. This new quad will lead a defence which is more concentrated on warfighting readiness and on deterrence. They'll shift the approach as an organisation which too often has been obsessed with process to one focused on outcomes, in which information flows quickly, accountabilities are clear, and results are demanded. And this new quad will be up and running from the 31st of March. And on finance, we'll match our new accountabilities with a department that manages money better, to secure better value for money for the taxpayer, better outcomes for the armed forces. And many recent failings, I think, can be traced back to the Conservative defence reforms known as the Levine reforms introduced in 2012. They produced too much duplication, too much waste, a system where only 2 out of 49 major defence projects are now on time and on budget. I'm ending Levine, and instead of the 10 current top-line budget holders, there will be 4 new budget holders, 1 for each of this new quad. We'll introduce 3 new centrally determined financial budgets, each with ministerial oversight: readiness, operations, investment. The new readiness budget will hold the chiefs of the services to account for how they run their day-to-day spending. This will be done by the Chief of Defence Staff through our new military strategic headquarters. The military strategic headquarters will be responsible for the new operations budget, unencumbered by the excess bureaucracy and the lack of clarity that characterises the way that defence is organised now. And ministers will direct those priorities. And then finally, our new National Armaments Director will run the single new investment budget, bringing together 8 separate procurement budgets across the organisation into one. This will help cut waste, reduce duplication. It'll help ensure that we are buying better what our frontline forces need. And in turn, the NAD will acquire only the capabilities which are affordable within the budgets set by ministers. These budgets, as with the Quad, will have initial operating capacity from the end of next month, 31st of March. And our new National Armaments Director will fundamentally change how defence works to partner with industry and how defence becomes the engine for driving economic growth. So sitting alongside the Permanent Secretary and the Chief of Defence Staff, they'll execute a £20 billion plus budget to build and sustain our national arms arsenal. Because at this time, we must rearm Britain. And I see this as a new FTSE 100 company within the MOD, tasked, if you like, with getting the very best capabilities needed into the hands of our frontline forces, delivering on our defence industrial strategy to create more defence jobs, more defence apprenticeships in every region and nation across the UK, tasked with driving British exports up and up wider, tasked with assuming responsibility for the entire end-to-end acquisition system for the MOD. They will save the taxpayer at least £10 billion over the next decade, savings that we will reinvest directly into Britain's defence. Our interim NAD will be in post by the end of next month. Recruitment for the permanent candidate is already underway. And so in conclusion, the world is changing, defence is changing. Our reform programme represents the biggest shake-up of UK defence for over 50 years. And let me say this. This is a government whose commitment to defence is unshakable. It's the foundation for our plan for change, for the delivery of our government's missions. We will match sustained investment with serious reform. It'll mean growing the economy. It'll mean a more muscular defence for a more dangerous world. It will mean Britain, which is secure at home and strong abroad. Thank you. Do you want me to take the questions up here or down there?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you very much. And there's a lot there that chimes with many areas of the Institute's research around procurement, around the importance of clear accountability, incentives and so on. So really good to hear that, and also good to see a clear plan developed in opposition coming to fruition with early action in government. I'm just going to start with a few questions myself, if that's okay, and then we'll go to the floor. So you talked about the excellence of the individuals who you've been working with, but there's a clear sense of frustration which comes through from your remarks about and a sense of the need for change at the MOD. Is it simply the case that you've entered a department which was just sort of too flat-footed to deliver the sort of change you want to see? And I guess my question is, you're not the first Secretary of State for Defence who's wanted to reform the MOD. What's going to be different this time around?
I mean, I've been certainly, as you say, I and Keir Starmer had recognised the requirement for defence reform early. We had come into government with a plan. What I've been struck by is how responsive defence is to direction and decision, how wide the appetite for change within defence is. And that's at every level. So I come across many just really talented officials who want greater scope to be able to take the initiative, who want the ability to offer the advice and make the decisions. And it goes right across the board and right to the top. I mean, the Chief of the Defence Staff did a speech at RUSI just before Christmas. And he said how much reform was needed. In some ways, he showed his frustration. He said that defence was still too slow, still too hierarchical, too concerned, or not enough concern with prioritisation. So I've been impressed and encouraged by how receptive defence is, how ready defence is for this reform. But I'm under no illusion that in the end this will only happen if I continue for the whole of the time that I am privileged to be in this post, for me to make this one of my first priorities as Defence Secretary. And I do it not because I want to spend my time doing this. There aren't any bonus points in politics for administrative and managerial reform, but I want the results. I want defence to be stronger. I want us to be more influential. And I want the people who are dedicated, that I talked about, in their different ways, right across defence, in and out of uniform, dedicated to defending our country and keeping people safe. I want them to be able to do the job that they've joined to do and they give their service to do. And that's my responsibility.
The good news is that the IFG, you do get points for administrative and managerial reform.
Thank you.
Turning to the changes in roles and jobs that you talked about, you talked about the National Armaments Director effectively being someone who's running a FTSE 100 company. That clearly requires a certain skill set.
Yep.
I guess by implication, you think that the system has not grown people with that skill set that you need. So what sort of can you tell us what sort of person you're looking for? What is the skill set they need? And can the civil service attract those sorts of people in?
First of all, I'll send you a copy of the recruitment pack with the job ad and the person spec, Hannah. The short answer is yes, we can attract that. We can never pay the top dollar salaries that mean we can compete. But what we offer is that sense of service to the nation. And now for me is the time, not just where this role is needed, now is the time where this role is possible. And I say that because the wide recognition of the increasing threats that we're facing means that I'm finding, and David, our permanent secretary, would say the same, that there is a level of willingness from investors, from industry, from people across the country to work with defence and want to play a part. So I think now's the moment where we can. And if you take a look at that span of authority, this is a singular job at a singular time that offers a singular opportunity to play a part in the future security and life of this nation. And that, I believe, will be sufficient to attract the sort of calibre of candidate we need to establish and then to fulfil this really demanding role.
You've talked today about the change needed in defence, but you think there's also, would you like to see changes in the defence industry with which your new NAD will be interacting?
100%. So before Christmas, I launched a statement of intent which set out the broad direction and principles for the defence industrial strategy that we are developing. I launched that at Rothschild and said then that I expected to spend as much of the next year talking to investors as to industry, to small and medium-sized, especially defence and potentially civil tech firms as the big primes. And this is a feature, I think, not just of the changing threats, but the changing way that we respond to this. And if Ukraine is the experience that in Germany they described as the Zeitenwende, Ukraine has the lessons which tell us how we can do things differently in the future, as well as the imperative that tells us we must.
One of your predecessor, Ben Wallace, said that the UK armed forces have been hollowed out and underfunded. Do you agree with that assessment, having been in the job for 6 months?
I did then, when he admitted this to me in Parliament in January 23. And it is certainly the case when you've seen the Ben Wallace's government came in 2010. The first thing they did in that first year was cut $2 billion from the defence budget. Over those first 5 years, George Osborne, as the Chancellor, reduced in real terms defence's budget by just under 19%. That's a very deep cut in defence, and the consequences are long-lasting. In 2010, when we lost the election and we were ejected from government in 2010, we were spending as a country 2.5% of GDP. That's the level that the last 14 years have got nowhere near. We had the British Army with over 100,000 full-time troops. It's now even below the 73,000 target mark that the previous government set. So there is a combination of a long legacy of decisions like that with an extraordinary professionalism and a willingness and a capacity to fight now, fight tonight, fight as required, and to do whatever this nation requires of our armed forces. And it's that extraordinary combination which is my responsibility as Defence Secretary now to lead.
So there's been a lot of speculation about the timetable for getting to 2.5%, and you talked about, obviously, that's going to be considered as part of the, set out as part of the spending review in the spring. But is the question also on the table of whether 2.5% is the right level to be aiming at?
Well, we've got to, first of all, in a way, what we're facing now is a vindication of the assessment and decisions we took as a party in opposition and put into our manifesto in government. A unique commitment to raising defence spending to levels we've not seen for 15 years. We've already made a start on that in the first budget, so this year the defence budget will be nearly £3 billion bigger than it was last year. And beyond that, we've said clearly, I've said it, Prime Minister said it, the Chancellor said it, is we will set that path to 2.5%, and we'll set that in the spring.
Okay. Taking a step back from the UK and our various spending and capabilities, you were at the Munich Security Conference. Did the US interventions there change your assessment of the state of European security?
No. What the discussions and with the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, what the debate within the Ukraine Defence Contact Group that Britain for the first time convened and I chaired, confirmed what I've been arguing, and I think what European nations have been recognising and actually been doing for some time, which is we know as European nations we need to step up on European security, on defence spending and on Ukraine. Especially over the last year, we've been doing just that. What Pete Hegseth accelerated was that recognition that we're stepping up, but we must go further. And what was so strong in the middle of the, let's say, the reaction to the strength of his messages, the content of his messages was not new. And what was so striking was the recognition and agreement by the European nations at that meeting and in the discussions that I chaired, that recognising we've been stepping up, but recognising and making the commitment that we must do more, and we will. And that, I think you've seen repeated and reinforced overnight by the Prime Minister in the statements he made in Paris.
Thanks. Okay, well, I'm going to take some questions from the floor now. We have a roving mic. I guess this lady here in the front row.
Thank you. Is it working?
Yes,
yeah.
It is.
Larissa Brown from The Times. Secretary of State, I'm just wondering what you think the minimum credible force is that the UK could send to Ukraine for a peacekeeping force. And are you confident that you would have enough protection for those troops, or what would you need from the US to guarantee that security? Thank you.
Just read them one at a time, sure.
You don't want to ask about defence reform? We need a security guarantee for Ukraine, in Ukraine, that is capable of delivering what President Trump has pledged and says he wants, which is a durable peace. That requires an end to the Russian attack and no repeat of that in the future. The European countries have to play a leading part in that guarantee, but require a backstop from the US, because in the end, it is only the US that can provide the deterrence to Putin that will prevent him attacking again. And the detail of that is being developed. Keir Starmer will discuss that with President Trump when they meet shortly. But the one thing I'm not going to do is discuss details of the work that we're doing, the discussions we're having with allies and with the US, because the one thing I don't want to do is make Putin any wiser.
Okay, down here at the front.
Thank you. Dominic Nichols from The Telegraph. Minister, if you listen to the signal, not the noise from Munich and Ramstein, the Americans were saying they'll do China, they expect Europe to do Europe. Why is it still a priority that we tilt to the Indo-Pacific and not Euro-Atlantic security? And on the numbers, you say you're going to make £10 billion savings in the next decade to reinvest in defence. That's great, because Meg Hillier, your colleague, says the black hole is at least 7 billion. So are you going to fill that black hole completely, or will some of the programmes contributing to the black hole going to be cut? Thank you.
No, the savings, Dominic, that I say that as a minimum over a decade we can secure by this new approach to procurement will all be recycled into defence. That won't be the only source of what we put into defence in order to meet the threats that we face. But it is absolutely, should be, and has not been in the past, a requirement of the way that we do our procurement. And on the Indo-Pacific, I've argued, I think probably since I first got this job 4 years ago, that we've gone in, we've declared, and we are a nation that has made the commitment to NATO first. A recognition that the European nations within NATO need to do more of the heavy lifting, and that the European nations in NATO need some of the NATO first and first in NATO leadership that the UK can provide. That's what we set out to do. On the Indo-Pacific, the previous government, when they did their second integrated review, confirmed that the Indo-Pacific tilt had been delivered. We have commitments and partnerships which are profound in the Indo-Pacific, from AUKUS to GCAP to other arrangements, and we can do a contribution to the balance of regional security in the Indo-Pacific, in support in particular to the US and other allies, in a wide variety of ways, from technology to industry to diplomacy and to sort of military training. We will provide a role, but fundamentally our first responsibility is in NATO, and that's where my focus is, that's where the Prime Minister's focus is, and that was at the heart of the terms of reference of our Strategic Defence Review.
Malcolm.
John, you talked about the MOD and the reform that you're going to lead in the Ministry of Defence, but quite a number of the phenomena that you've been talking about are government-wide. There are things which I'm sure your cabinet colleagues are also grappling with, issues of cost escalation and delays and the need for reform. You've talked, of course, Peter Kyle has talked about the need for AI to transform government and so on. So can you say a little bit about how your reform package in the MOD fits with the wider reform which the government's pledged to across Whitehall?
I suppose in its simplest terms, it reflects what the Chancellor is now saying, which is no investment without reform. But it's an imperative that I bring as Defence Secretary with a singular focus to defence. And I said in the remarks that I made earlier on, this is not a change for change's sake programme. This is because it is required, in my view, for us more effectively to meet the challenges of the times. It's required, in my view, in order to give us the foundation for implementing the Strategic Defence Review. And by the same token, I expect to see the Defence Review reinforcing the imperative and the direction of defence reform.
Minister John Paul Rathbone, Financial Times, about the National Armaments Director and the kind of person you're looking for. On the spectrum of possible recruits, are you looking for someone like, say, Elon Musk, who's going to drive efficiency through the MOD as well as launch Starlink, or someone like Kate Bingham, or a civil servant? And second of all, when are you going to publish the job advert? Because although you've said it would be published, it has not been published yet, despite the urgency of the post.
I'm looking for the very top talent that we can attract. They're Their job is very clearly not the internal reform of the Department of State. That's the Permanent Secretary's job. And in terms of the recruitment process has already started. It's in the hands of the Civil Service Commissioners, so it's independently driven. And that is, for now, the answer to your question about the ad.
The gentleman there.
Edward Stringer, Senior Fellow, Policy Exchange. Secretary of State, you've been very clear from a year ago, as you said, about your plans for reform. You hit the ground running, and I think it's fair to say the change programme hasn't been plain sailing to deliver, and you're going to go live at the end of March. At that point, the NAD is going to have to create and change the cultural mindset of a whole range of industry, from global primes through to national champions down to SMEs. As you look back over the change from the last 7 or 8 months internally, what do you think needs to be put in place so that the NAD can drive that external cultural change that we're going to need to see to deliver all the benefits that you're looking for?
I don't know of any big change programme that hasn't been complicated. And I don't know of any big organisational change programme that it can ever be said to be completed. So I expect this to be a feature of my role for the entire time that I'm in this position. Quite simply, I think if, in answer to you, what needs to be put in place, it is the singular accountability and authority that this new National Armaments Director position will have, the singular control over investment, and the particular contribution that it makes to the very top-level balance of investment decisions. And I think that combination with the definition of new relationship and partnership with business, not just the major primes, I think will start to create the ability to deliver better, get better value for money, be able to do what we need for our frontline forces more quickly. And I mentioned earlier on, when I launched what we described as a statement of intent, the principles and direction for a new defence industrial strategy before Christmas. On that day, for the first time, we brought into the Ministry of Defence a range of senior business and industry leaders into a wargaming exercise for the first time. So in other words, not bringing them in to say, look, here's a multiple specification for this next contract that we require, but here's what we think we're facing. Actually, not just what do you think the capabilities you can deliver to help us with this. Here's what we're facing. Here in a, if you like, a dynamic way, is how things might change. So we're looking for your contribution and your role in future. Now that is a fundamentally different relationship that we're starting to establish. And in many ways, it's a recognition, I think, from one of the major lessons that Ukraine has reminded us, which is that a nation's armed forces are only as strong as the industry that stands behind them. And we've allowed ourselves to forget that, overlook that. We can't do that any longer. And it'll be the National Armaments Director's job to help put that in place.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to draw this to a close. I'm going to use Chair's prerogative to ask you one final question from the IFG. Whenever we get ministers on the stage, we always like to ask them to reflect a little bit. I'm interested, obviously you have previous experience of having been a minister. In your reflections on the last, I'm interested in your reflections on the last 6 months, how the experience has been. If you had your time again, would you prepare any differently, or do you think it's all gone exactly as you had anticipated?
I wouldn't have prepared differently. I would have a good question. I wouldn't have prepared differently. I would have been better prepared for the extraordinary talent that I'd never seen a glimpse of, because one of the odd features of the British system is that if you're in government, you have access to everything. If you're in opposition, you have access to nothing. People often assume that if you're Shadow Defence Secretary, you get privileged briefings and you know what's going on. Not the case. The one thing I would like to have seen differently would be Putin recognising that he can end this war and pull back, and so we weren't faced with the huge challenge we have in playing our part in helping lead the defence of Ukraine, and doing so because they're fighting and they're the front line of defending the UK as well. That's the one thing. If you're offering me a magic wand, I would have waved on day one.
Thanks very much. Can I ask you all to join me in thanking John for a really fascinating.
Thank you.
And the recording of the event will be available on our website shortly. Thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thank you all.